Welcome to the Optimize Remote Work and Control Costs with Windows Virtual Desktop, brought to you by Microsoft. Today's agenda includes introductions, the Better Together Microsoft and Partners message, why Microsoft Windows Virtual Desktop, addressing common customer concerns, and offers. Today's presentation is brought to you by Microsoft and Coretek. I'm your introductory speaker, Aaron Roden. I'm a cloud solution architect. Today I have with me Ryan Hinkleman and Glenn Davis from Coretek. Ryan is a director of hybrid services and Glenn is a solutions architect.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for having us, Aaron.
Better together. Microsoft has a rich and robust partner ecosystem, and we're really proud of how we're able to enable customers worldwide through our partner ecosystem. Together with our service partners and our third-party software partners, such as Citrix, VMware, Nerdio, and today with Coretek, we're able to empower customers worldwide to do great things. With that being said, I'd like to pause a moment and introduce our partner, Coretek.
Thank you, Aaron, for the kind introduction. Ryan Hinkleman here, Director of Hybrid Practices at Coretek Services.
And Glenn Davis, Hybrid Solution Architect under Ryan.
We'd like to tell you a little bit about Coretek Services. We are a system integration and managed service provider here in the Metro Detroit area. And quite simply, our motto is customer success, no exceptions. We're very, very proud to be a Microsoft partner, and we are an Azure Expert MSP, which is held in high regard both by us and by Microsoft, and we continue our gold partnership as well. We have over 15 years of experience, much of that in the traditional VDI space, and now excited to be growing into WVD. We are a Microsoft Cloud Solution provider, and we were one of the very first lighthouse partners into the overall WVD program. As you can see, we have a strong set of partners with us here at Coretek that leverage the complete ecosystem of end user compute to bring the best possible solution to you, the customer.
So let's get started with why Windows Virtual Desktop. So let's take a moment and talk about when WVD is useful. The four major categories that we have for customers that are using WVD are security and regulation, elastic workforce, remote employees, and specialized workloads. So to drill down into that a little bit, in the security and regulation, a lot of customers in the financial services, the legal industry, healthcare, and government have to take that extra step for compliance and regulations of centralized security, and WVD is capable and beneficial in those contexts. The elastic workforce, we have customers that are undergoing mergers and acquisitions, short-term employees, contractors, and partners. You can dynamically scale up and scale down that workforce in terms of WVD access. So it's very beneficial in those regards. Remote employees, BYOD and mobile. It's becoming a very popular trend in a number of customers to bring your own device. We have call center context, we have branch worker context, and WVD is a really good suit for that context as well. Specialized workloads. We have legacy applications that aren't necessarily native to Windows 10, software dev test context, design and engineering, where you have custom applications that only run in a specific OS, etc. Windows Virtual Desktop is generally available worldwide. We're able to deliver the only multi-session Windows 10 experience. We can enable optimizations for Office 365 Pro Plus, migrate Windows Server RDS, desktops, and apps, and deploy and scale in minutes. A key differentiator of WVD is that we're able to deliver the only multi-session Windows 10 experience. I just want to bring that out. The other thing is that we can store legacy application remoting, and also for your Windows 7 supported applications, we can provide extended security updates for Windows 7. So if you have certain OS contexts in your environment today that need that extended support, WVD enables that capability. Another differentiator is the optimizations for Office 365 Pro Plus. We're able to, with Office 365 containers, make Office more performant in multi-session environments, including Outlook, OneDrive for Business, and other Office applications. Profile containers enable faster and more performant experience in non-persistent environments. So what does that mean? Essentially, you can reduce the number of images that you deploy in WVD and dynamically attach Office applications. Furthermore, in the marketplace in Azure, we have pre-built WVD images with Office 365 already contained in them. Another benefit is that you can migrate your remote desktop services environments with simplified infrastructure management and deployment tools on Azure. So for those of you who are currently using Azure to connect to Windows servers via RDS, you can change that methodology and security approach by switching over to WVD. We support older versions of Windows Server 2012 and Windows 2012 R2, and we also have application compatibility for existing Windows Server images that are used on-premise. A last point I'd like to bring out is that Azure has data centers in over 60 regions and 140 countries. At least half of those regions have high availability, meaning that there are multiple data centers within a region, and you can deploy WVD globally and scale quickly. FS Logic's technologies. Eligible customers get access to three core pieces of technology. The profile container, which includes Office 365 container, which roams Office cache data, is an excellent way to containerize your technology. And a key point that I'd like to bring out is app masking. This is a great advantage in FS Logics and in the Windows Virtual Desktop technology. It allows you to minimize the number of images that you have and actually dynamically deploy applications per WVD instance. Let's take a moment to talk about WVD architecture. Starting from left to right, you start with endpoints. That can be any HTML5 client, Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, and Linux endpoints. They can be on-premise or remote. You have to have an ADDS server, and you have to have an Azure AD Connect server. The Azure AD Connect server synchronizes with your Azure Active Directory. We also recommend that you have desktop spoke VNet for the Windows virtual desktops, as opposed to the hub. Customers can use the Express Route technology, which is an on-ramp into Azure for long-term solutions, but you can start today with a site-to-site VPN. Finally, to the right, you would like to have highly performant Azure NetApp files or Azure files for SMB storage. So let's take a moment to talk about the differences between traditional VDI and desktop as a service. Traditionally, you had on the left all of these responsibilities as customers to implement and make happen. Today, on the right, with desktop as a service, all of these can be handled by Microsoft in Azure, as well as our partner for entitlement and image management. So with that being said, I'd like to turn this over to Coretek to talk about customer concerns.
Thank you, Aaron. Glenn and I are here today, and we'd like to walk you through what we have seen as common concerns with some of our customers that we've had good fortune to walk through the WVD deployment process since its inception. And we'd really like to do that through walking you through one customer in particular and some of the concerns that they had, knowing that they're largely going to be in common with potentially some of the audience's concerns that they might experience, and really how the technology is geared to overcome those, and how we at Coretek particularly deploy those technologies to overcome some of those concerns along the way. Given that, we would like to focus today on our customer Eversource Energy. And they're really great use case to understand because obviously they are a power provider on the East Coast of the United States, and they have a need to be able to quickly flex capacity and in a highly elastic manner to be able to deploy out desktops. And those desktops for them are largely centered around managing outages, which, as any of you that have been to the East Coast know, can be sudden and drastic given the weather, especially in the winter. And so it causes their workforce to need to change gears suddenly and deploy a different set of applications and a different set of priorities. And WVD helps them to do that, and we'll walk through how. But one of the initial hurdles was really that it would be difficult to implement. And I know that we are going to walk through some of that and what the perception was, and we'll actually demonstrate that. And then that is in fact not difficult to implement, and walk through some of the requirements, and then we'll move on to some of the additional concerns that we found along the way.
Yeah, and so as Aaron was referencing earlier about some of those requirements, you have the Active Directory dependency, there's networking and DNS components, and really if you're already established in Azure, it's a lot easier to implement. However, we have the ability to address that concern because of Coretek's 15 years of experience in VDI, well before the public cloud really was an option. So it was a natural progression for us as a Microsoft partner to expand into what we call the hybrid cloud and be ready for solutions like WVD when they came out. So we guide our customers through the process. We help them demystify those dependencies. And even some customers, an energy company that's been around a long time, they have that true hybrid environment. But if you are a cloud-first company or somebody that's starting up your infrastructure in the cloud, the complexity to implement becomes a lot smaller because you don't have to create those extensions to your network. And we can help you create a secure remote environment to satisfy those requirements. So laying the groundwork, you kind of have what we talked about is in the industry term of a greenfield environment, you have no Azure. So as Aaron's diagram referenced earlier, getting that connection up through either an express route or an IPsec tunnel can help you create that bridge to open up connectivity, synchronize Active Directory, and allow you to deploy those resources. But if you are a greenfield customer, there are some simpler methods through this company, Nerdio, a third-party partner, has a tool that can help you deploy all those things from scratch from a wizard-based deployment. Azure AD Directory Services is a hybrid ability to not have to build traditional Active Directory domain services. It's not meant for large enterprise environments, but if it's a small environment or POC or development, you can use an Azure service to provide those directory services to enable you to use WVD, and it's very wizard driven. The other two is where you're establishing a new landing zone or you have an existing Azure presence. Coretek partners with partners like Nerdio to identify the existing resources. How do we get in and connect to your file shares, your application servers, setting up your WVD, have features that Nerdio has been adding on, such as built-in scaling, user assignment, monitoring, session management, shadowing, things like that Microsoft is working rapidly to bring into their product. But Microsoft, as referenced earlier, really relies on their partner ecosystem to bring more value to their product. So now we're going to jump into a resource deployment to see just how quickly you can get WVD up and running. So now we're going to deploy a Windows Virtual Desktop host pool. Some of the pre-existing requirements is that you have a VNet, that you have an Active Directory, and you have some DNS settings set on your VNet. So just to quickly show you what's available there. I have a VNet called Coretek WVD in North Central US, and I have my DNS for that VNet pointed to my Active Directory servers. And they are reachable because in my instance, Coretek is hybrid, but we have domain controllers on-premise and in the cloud. So this is our production environment to show you how easy it is. So we have reachability and an existing VNet that we're going to deploy resources into. So you can search in the top bar for the Windows Virtual Desktop Azure Blade, and you can go to create a host pool wizard. Here it's going to ask you for specific pieces of information. You can either create a new resource group or select an existing. You're going to name your host pool, and you're going to select your region. I know my VNet is in North Central, so I'm going to place it there. Then you select whether or not you have a validation environment. Most people can select no here because validation environment is Microsoft's way of testing updates to the WVD agents before they roll out. So if you're in a production environment, you can enable a host pool to get those updates before the rest of your host pools, just to make sure that the updates go well and it's not going to adversely affect your environment. Next, you select your host pool type, and it's either personal or pooled. We're going to select pooled so that you can obtain some of that high-end density that we're looking for. And we're going to allow users to roam between the desktops in a scaled fashion. So in my case, I'm going to select 10 users per instance. And then I'm going to choose the load balancing algorithm. And if I'm trying to optimize cost, which we're going to reference later, I'm going to go with depth first so that I fill up the first machine before I start powering on and filling up the next machines. I do want to add some machines to my host pool, so we're going to give it a name prefix. And Microsoft is going to add 0 through 9 and additional numbers to be able to add multiple. All right, and then you choose your image type. Now, if you're familiar with virtualization, you could pre-build an image with your applications loaded on it, and it would show up under your image selections. However, if you're just looking to provide remote work with Office functionality, Microsoft provides multi-session images with the Microsoft 365 apps integrated. So it's very useful in those quick access scenarios and how you're able to get started. I'm going to select an A4 VM size with 32 gigs of RAM for my 10 users. And one of the most common sizes is a D8S V3, and that provides great density and performance. I'm just using this for demonstration purposes. I'm going to stand up 2 VMs, and then you choose your disk type. Standard SSD is probably great for most use cases. If you're looking for the maximum performance, then you're going to select premium SSD so that you can really drive the performance of the OS and the users on that machine. I'm going to select that VNet that I showed you earlier. And because I have my network security groups already associated with that VNet, I don't have to make those selections. And I want to join the domain. And then you select a local administrator account, and that can be either templatized. Here we're just showing it for ease of use, but you can store these in ARM templates and have a lot of these values pre-populated so that it's a lot easier for your desktop administrators to deploy additional host pools. It's going to validate that your password is the same. We do want to register the desktop group to a workspace, and that is the workspace that users see when they log in to WVD. You can apply any tags if you wanted to do chargeback or anything to identify specific reports or things in your Azure environment. And then lastly, we go and validate the environment, and then we click Create to spawn the environment. And then I think I already have one rolling, so I'm going to break and show the one that I created. So you can see my newly spawned host pools, and for the interest of time, I'm going to just show connecting to one of the resources in my WVD environment that just spawned from that image. So with the remote desktop client, I can go and launch my WVD desktop, and then log in with my Windows credentials, and then select Remember Me so that I'm not prompted again, and my device is secured by my hybrid Azure AD join. Now I'm connecting to my Windows Virtual Desktop without being exposed to the internet behind a secure solution inside Azure. And I'm on the Microsoft Azure backbone where I have great performance and access to all my company's applications that are previously deployed. Okay.
So as Glenn just quickly demonstrated, it's very efficient to deploy WVD. Thank you, Glenn, so much for that. And obviously that brings us to our next concern, and really the realization that was as easy as it was, and now you can scale very, very quickly. And so the next question, logically, for most users, becomes, well, what about the cost? If it's truly this simple and seamless to scale up effectively for all my users, how do I manage that spend, knowing that it's on a as-need consumption basis? So we know that in a traditional VM world, when we're looking at the capital outlay, having unmanaged VMs is extremely costly. Leaving machines on that aren't being used is consuming resource and consuming cost that I may not want to take on. And management efforts of these are creating some problems for me. So really, Eversource I know had that concern of really at this kind of scale, how do we manage that going forward? And how do we overcome that now that we've enabled ourselves?
Yeah, so to demystify some of that, you have to take a multifaceted approach to it. So some of those desktop types, whether it's pooled or if it's a personal desktop, you have different options, right? Microsoft built some scripting to allow you to manage the scaling of pooled environments, but it's really difficult to do that on a static, unmanaged VM or an assigned VM. So that's where we can do things like auto shutdown or user-initiated start operations by giving them permission to their VM only, as well as accommodating those pooled session hosts with either third parties of Nerdio and CloudJumper or the Microsoft automation. And we're going to jump in and reference those user types to kind of show how you break them out.
Yes, first and foremost, when you look at cost control and sizing and all the different things, you need to really truly understand your users, because they're going to have a different effect on the sizing of your solution. You saw Glenn quickly select a VM size based on what he knew to be our needs here at Coretek to be effective as remote workers, but that's based on a lot of things. So knowing your users is extraordinarily important. Are you facilitating that knowledge or task worker, which might be something where you're bringing a desktop into a factory environment or into a call center where you have a very select and high density understood series of applications that is more transactional and allows for greater efficiency? Moving up the scale, maybe you have those professional users that are going to use a greater array of applications and or may use them at a different level than a task worker might, and therefore might demand a different set of resources behind that, maybe potentially in a more dedicated fashion. And as you move up the scale, maybe you're into the CAD/CAM, which you can successfully service in WVD, along with the mating of potentially a GPU card for some of that high-end work. But of course, as you might imagine, some of that might be pretty demanding on the asset type that is required from a VM perspective to be able to successfully deliver that with the expected performance of, say, an engineer. So understanding those users, we have a lot of different tools to do so, such as partners from Lakeside help you understand that and what those application workloads are so that you can effectively size and understand based on your users what that might be.
Absolutely. And partnering with a partner like Coretek, we can help you manage these environments ongoing, make sure that you're right sized and that you are controlling those costs. There's three main pillars we want to talk about when we talk about how the economics are driven by this. And that's with the infrastructure that we kind of talked about and referenced earlier with Aaron. Being able to have a native Windows 10 experience, but not have to pay for an entire machine for every single user, fitting into those knowledge worker use cases and scaling them with the scaling tools really allows you to take advantage of the economies of scale of shared infrastructure, right? So we can get that value compute right there. From a licensing perspective, Eversource was able to immediately use WVD because they didn't have to spend anything additional licensing or go through the process of acquiring it. They already had their Windows entitlement. And then if you have a Windows 7 workload that you still are required to support some applications, Microsoft allows you to deploy those with extended security updates included if you run those desktops in Azure. That could be really powerful because we know that the price of extended support increases year over year on-prem, and everybody went through this with Windows XP. And lastly, from a labor perspective, not having to manage power, cooling, buying the equipment, installing it, setting up all those additional things that normally come with a traditional data center environment allows you to reduce the amount of labor costs that it takes to manage these environments. So further driving into that Windows 10 experience at multi-session cost, we don't want to do one user per VM. Windows takes a certain amount of resources to run just on its own. So every instance of Windows that you have running drives additional costs just to start the virtual machine. If you can give users a native Windows 10 experience that they're looking for, but provide multi-session experience, you can really drive the cost down at scale for those users that qualify for the multi-session experience. Talking about cost-effective compute and storage, we've all been here. When you buy on-premise, you have to plan for your peak usage. So you have to size with a little bit extra, or in some cases a lot extra. And that's fine if there's something that you have to do on-prem, but we also know that everybody's looking to enable their hybrid workflow and have those rapidly expanding use cases where it just doesn't make sense from a time and materials perspective to be able to get that running on-prem. So why not use the elasticity of the cloud where your resource usage is aligned with exactly what you're paying for? And when you're done with it, you can scale it back to your normal workloads, say in retail or energy where you have those storm scenarios. So it's really great. Now, from a pool perspective, you have some of those VMs that you need always available. And so you can leverage Microsoft Azure reserved instances to pay the lowest costs you can because those machines are going to be running all the time. However, during peak periods or off-peak periods, you can shut most of those machines down. So reserved instance doesn't make sense because you can save a lot more by using pay-go rates and allow the system to automatically scale to where you need it to be.
This scenario is especially relevant and effective for our friends at Eversource, and I think maybe potentially for you listening as well. Because if you think about their situation that we talked to earlier, they had a scenario by which their demand would be sudden and vast. And in the world of on-premise infrastructure, previously they would have to buy and invest in hardware for their highest possible use, which was above and beyond what they would get in a normal daily, what they call blue sky situation where the weather was fine. But when that weather turned, demand doubled or tripled, and the investments had to reflect that. So in this model, it allows for that flexibility and a lower net investment of on-prem resources and that elasticity that's required to help them really not only control costs as incurred in Azure, but also mitigating some of the investments they would otherwise have to make in traditional on-prem infrastructure.
Yeah, and reducing that after the peak was experienced, which kind of leads into the last point of being able to use the management services that are already out there with licenses you already own. They didn't have to deploy any brokers. They didn't have to deploy a license server. They didn't have to deploy a certificate authority or set all of those things up. All they had to do was build their images, set up the pools that we helped them identify, and deploy. The management plane is globally available, and they were just able to access it immediately.
So we've successfully and quickly deployed a solution, and we've found out that it's very, very easy to scale. So we've in turn now optimized our costs by understanding our users, right-sizing our environment for them, and understanding the licensing benefits available to us to help us manage that cost that we would otherwise incur. But the last thing we really hear a lot of, when we heard it originally from Eversource, and we've heard it from other customers and have worked diligently to reverse, is the perception that it's somehow difficult to optimize or manage. And customers that may have looked at WVD early on in its evolution saw a lot of command line that they may not have been too familiar with, or maybe didn't understand some of the inherent concepts, and said, maybe this isn't for me right now. I'm very, very busy with the needs that my organization has and the requirements of me. I don't have the capability to take on this new technology at this time and understand some of the principles required. And how am I going to manage all of the data and user interactions behind it? So we at Coretek really have some defined principles for how we would overcome some of these things. First and foremost is really understanding what that use case looks like. You saw on the slide earlier where we talked to understanding the users and their applications. That's the fundamental aspect of a use case assessment, is really understanding how that user is going to use that machine so that you can plan for a successful delivery, and then being able to deliver that effectively for that group.
Yeah, and then Coretek, we can help you with the Azure native solution really well. We know how to work with Azure automation and help you to optimize and manage the environment at scale. But if you're looking for that partner ecosystem availability, and you really want a full driven GUI with all of those additional optimizations, that's where those third parties like Nerdio and CloudJumper come in, and we can help you deploy those native Azure app services into the environment. They're really easy to get started with, just to give you that additional management ability if you're not comfortable with the native Azure tools. Microsoft is consistently adding to that, so that's becoming more ubiquitous, but we want to be able to help customers with whatever their needs are. So we have a unified managed service as well, and can offload that from your guys' departments if you need to do that. And we do provide some of those services to Eversource across different use cases. And now we just want to talk about optimizing it a little bit more, and jumping down to the next slide. We wanted to specifically draw this out because anybody who's been in VDI in the past knows that if you can't get your users to adopt it or help them understand the value of it, just because it's secure doesn't mean that it's going to be well respected. So what Microsoft did by acquiring FSLogix and making it available to WVD users is really allowing you to get that fast performance for Microsoft Exchange and Outlook. Use your SharePoint and OneDrive repositories, and really allow administrators to reduce the load on the infrastructure to optimize and manage costs and the performance. So having that non-persistent workload with roaming the desktop search for Outlook in your files and those things really helps drive adoption inside your company to be able to optimize and manage WVD.
Thank you, Glenn. Given that, you've seen how we've shown just how easy it is to deploy, just how effectively we can manage some of the costs that may incur from deploying a WVD solution, and how we can manage that either with you or show you how through various tool sets and capabilities, so that you can have a forward-leaning solution going into your customer base and in your user base. So really, why select Coretek to help you deploy WVD? And the answer I think we've shown here today, but we're born in the cloud. We've put an investment in that, and we bring together that with our years and years of experience in this end user compute space, WVD and VDI at large. We understand those environments and how to optimize them for both cost and performance, and we have full managed desktop offering to help us do that.
And we also will help you just perform your lift and shift and adoption of the hybrid cloud so that you can bring the applications that the users are going to use up into the agile Azure cloud as well. So what we're offering is a WVD readiness assessment. We want to help you plan WVD focused on the end user. Coretek has been focusing on the end user with our use case assessments for 15 years, branching back to before cloud, and we're going to offer you a free assessment offer to take a look at 3 use cases, show you an ROI and a TCO so you can understand what it really costs and how you could get started in WVD so that you can present your case to management to drive that adoption. So we wanted to offer that to you. And then lastly, we're going to pass it back to Microsoft to talk about some of their offers for WVD.
Thank you, Glenn and Ryan. I'm really excited to talk about Microsoft's 30% off WVD promotion. For customers between now and March 31st, if you activate, we offer 30% off of WVD. This is an excellent promotion for customers who want to test drive, pilot, proof of concept, WVD, and it's extended for 90 days. I encourage you to go to aks.ms/WVD offer. We're going to stick around for a few more minutes for questions in the chat. Please reach out to us to begin your WVD implementation today.